Hi, my name is Cecil Mitu, and welcome to our workshop pre-training for problem-based learning and multimedia integration. Now, how do we approach problem-based learning and multimedia integration? Well, first of all, we must have an authentic setting. What are these authentic settings? This has to look at the design of the problem-based lesson. The title has to be very much realistic, and also the multimedia integration has to be realistic in terms of the videos, the movies, the documentaries, or the games that will be integrated in the lesson. Why do we do this? Because we want to have learning as real as possible so that we can have cognitive development of our students. The process of cognitive development has to do with how information is acquired, how information is processed to build knowledge, and how information is actually retained in the brain. Then we have to look at the retrieval of this information, how it can be simulated and applied to real-world circumstances. Now, how do we develop authentic titles? First of all, we have to look at our curriculum and see what the learning information has to include. Then, we have to look at the environment around us. We might take this from a realistic situation in the community, or we could also do it from movies or videos. But how best do we develop authentic lesson titles? Well, if we involve students in the entire development of a lesson from the onset, we can have authentic lesson title and lesson development. So what we ought to do is to throw out to our students what we would like to study. Ask these students to participate. Listen to their input. Listen to the questions they asked. Interact with their information. And together, the class and you as a teacher will develop an authentic lesson title. This authentic lesson title is really a realistic way for having learning inside the classroom. Now, I will invite you to look at handout number 1 so that you can gather more information that is related to what our workshop will be all about. And you take about 10 minutes, read through, and you can share, and we will reflect and discuss what you have read. Hi, welcome back. We want to conceptualize between problem-based learning and project-based learning. However, both problem-based learning and project-based learning has very common attributes. Some of these include the cognitive learning process, which is believed to be the active learning process based on the constructivist view of learning. This is where it is also believed that knowledge exists within the ecology of the environment, and this means that learning takes place actively among the social system. The problems are authentic that are being studied. They are authentic in the nature of their design, that a real problem exists. And the whole learning experience is authentic in that it is actual, factual, and an experience that everyone participates in for knowledge building. Both problem-based learning and project-based learning utilizes group settings where learning communities are formed for cooperative learning and collaborative interaction. Both processes are student-centered, where it is looked at how students learn, how information is processed, how knowledge is created, how knowledge is stored, how knowledge is retrieved, interpreted, and also applied to situational problems. It is the teacher who becomes the facilitator and a coach during the learning experiencing, guiding learning, making sure that students do not socialize, rather they are engaged in the learning process and discipline is maintained. Students also becomes responsible for their learning. They are the ones who help to design the authentic lesson or topic. They are the ones who do their research, gather their information, select relevant, valid, and current information that they use to make up the content that is guided by the curriculum. Now, what is problem-based learning? Problem-based learning is suited for classroom-type activities that are within 1, 2, or 3 lessons. And this is where a problematic situation is identified. And all learning is organized around the problematic situation which guides the curriculum. On the other hand, project-based learning sees the end result. What is the project or the product that will be at the end of all this training or learning? So all activities, all learning experiences are planned around working towards this project. Therefore, that's where the main difference is. For problem-based learning, it is a problematic situation at the beginning that guides learning, and for project-based learning, it is the end product or a project that all learning experiences are guided by. Now, you could read handout number 2. Hi, how do we look at multimedia learning? How do we conceptualize multimedia learning? Well, multimedia learning can be student-centered or it can be technology-centered. What do we mean by that? Well, technology-centered looks at how technology is designed, the different kinds of technology that is in the marketplace, and how it contributes towards learning. We can talk about technology in terms of movies, videos, documentary, virtual streaming, podcasting, and so on. But during World War I and II, technology did make an impact on the environment in terms of learning. And there is still investigations being carried on as to how technology can be improved for learning. Then we move on to student-centered learning. And this looks deeper into how the human brain processes information, how learning takes place, how does cognitive development takes place, how can information be presented so as to avoid overloading. But what is overloading? Overloading is when we present the information in such a manner that it is cumbersome, complex, and very difficult for students to process. Processing information as techniques towards this that we will be looking at a little bit deeper in our workshop. But Dr. Mayer has identified 3 metaphors for learning, and this has to do with response strengthening, information acquisition, and knowledge construction. Briefly, all 3 metaphors looks at the material to be learned, the student who is the learner, the teacher who is the facilitator and coach, and the multimedia itself, how it is designed and presented. For response strengthening, it looks a little bit more on the whole process of reward for learning or punishment for learning. And based on how students evolve their learning process, they are expecting some kind of reflection or feedback from the teacher. So that has to do with response strengthening, and we could look at some other theories like Thorndike's processes of how response can be strengthened or can be weakened. Now we have information acquisition. Information acquisition looks at how the information is presented to the student. Is it presented in a complex and cumbersome way? Can the student understand the information being presented? Is the multimedia properly designed? But what do we mean by properly designed? There are several factors again that we will look at in our workshop to have a proper designed multimedia for selection and use. Now, knowledge construction is quite unique because this looks at each individual, how they learn. We could have this entire class right here, our workshop, but each of us are individual. What we see, what we gather as information, and what we process is very personal. But this is the reason why we also have to share out and reflect, so that each of us will come up with a common understanding, redefining problems for learning, and have a common solution towards our goal. Now, we can further look at learning that reflects 3 cognitive loading. This has to do with extraneous loading, essential loading, and generative loading. The most challenging of all these loads are extraneous loading, where there is too much irrelevant information being passed on to the student. This can be passed on just by watching me making this presentation. This can also be passed on by the multimedia we used when they are not properly designed, which will be what our workshop is going to be focused on along with the PBL lesson plan. Essential loading, however, looks at the complex way in which information is presented. Too much information being downloaded on the student becomes very cumbersome and can be very frustrating too. Now, generative learning is the kind of learning we want to take place, and this is where students expect us to appreciate them as learners, and so we speak to them in a personal way. We use the terminologies like I, you, we, and us in terms of the information. We do not reflect very heavily on the learning material. We reflect most at the social system who are our students. So we're going to take about 8 or 10 minutes once more to look at handout number 3 to understand these concepts.